Wasatch Report, shooting straight on everything from prepping to politics.
Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Wasatch Report. I am your host, Suzanne Sherman, and you have tuned into the Cerberus Radio Network, where we defend freedom and liberty from the flames of tyranny. It is a spring morning here in the hinterlands of Utah, Monday, April 30th. May is 24 hours away, and it looks like a snow globe out here. You got to love the mountains. You can follow us over on Facebook, facebook.com/Cerberus Radio Network. We have a fan page too, facebook.com/CRN. You can follow me there also, facebook.com/Suzanne Sherman, the Wasatch Report radio show. I also have my own page, the Suzanne Sherman page, also known as Cowgirl Esquire. We have an app you can turn on and put on your Android phone and listen to us. We have a Radio Co Loop, and we have all sorts of shows playing 24 hours a day. Some of it original broadcasting, like my show, the Renegade and the Rambler radio show. The Bailey Report aired last night. John Zangaro, who's running for political office in the state of Pennsylvania, home state of our founders, Jeff Johnson and Daniel Bailey. We have The Other Side, a podcast by Justin and Mike, two high school teachers who have a fantastic point of view. Brush Fires of Freedom show. I think they found a new home radio station in Tucson, Arizona. Things are getting a little too hot for good old Sean Hoffine at the FM station. People don't want to hear what we have to say. And speaking of people not wanting to hear what we have to say, I've got the master coming on to join us in a few moments. And his name is Mark Kreslins. Those of you that listen to us over at another network, I had been doing a show for a while with some friends once a week, and that went away, and I decided to just kind of fade back into oblivion and live my life quietly in the mountains. And a friend of mine from Facebook told me to pick up the headset and help him out when he was having some health issues. And so I started with this morning show, and back in I went. And I want to bring on my very, very good special friend, someone I admire very much, Mark Kreslins. How are you today? Well, I'm doing great, Suzanne. It's good to be back with you again. It's been too many months for us to host together. And I have very many fond memories of our time together on the air back on that other network. And I'm thrilled to see how much progress that you guys have made over here on the network. And you guys are moving the ball. And as you said, you know, truth is inconvenient and people don't like truth, sadly. Now, people will claim they like truth, but then when hard truth appears, suddenly I don't think I like that kind of truth. I like the good kind of truth that's easy for me to live out. And folks, with what's going on around the country, around the union of 50 separate and sovereign states, defies our ability, or should defy our ability to say, I just want convenient truth. Folks, we need a dose of truth, and let the truth lead where it must, and then we follow the truth. It does us no good as people who beat our chest, pound our chest, and claim to be the most moral country in the world, the greatest nation ever, excuse my French, and then sit around while a Holocaust is going on around us. Once here recently, I've written on this topic, and I made the statement, you want to see what the church looks like in the middle of a Holocaust? Look around. That's what it looks like. What we're doing while babies are being slaughtered, while the 8th commandment for those who are Christians is being violated every single day through taxation. Look around. This is what it looks like for a impotent church, the evangelical church, to do absolutely nothing. This is exactly what it looks like, except for my friends over here on the Cerberus Radio Network. You guys are plowing ground. And I'm thrilled to be on the show with you today, Suzanne. It's fun to be back in the saddle again, if you will. Oh, I'm delighted. You know, one thing, as you know, I travel around this continental landmass quite a bit. And one thing I do happen to see with these churches, with their moving forward and embracing this new morality and reality we have, is the gay pride flag in front of so many churches. And they're trying to show how loving and accepting Jesus is by welcoming all sinners. And nobody's saying they shouldn't. We all sin. We all pick our poison. And it's not our responsibility to judge others, but the fact that they consider themselves, I see this as virtue signaling. There's no flag out there for adulterers. There's no flag out there for addicts, but there's one political movement that gets its flag. All the while, nobody's talking about the babies that are being murdered systematically with government funding against our wishes of the sovereign states. Many states do not want to tolerate this, Oklahoma being one of them. And we're going to talk about what's going on in Oklahoma as well. And this also ties in the facts of federalism. We talk about this on my show all the time, and this makes people very uncomfortable. I find it difficult to listen to pretty much all of the talk radio shows because, again, they have no concept between the differentiation of nationalism and patriotism. And if you do not stand and say that Pledge of Allegiance or take your hat off, put your hand over that heart when that national anthem comes on, I'm sorry, with all the corruption that we have in this government right now, Hillary Clinton running free, all these criminals that are supposed to be enforcing law, the Department of Injustice, waging war on sovereign nations without congressional approval, we've become a banana republic. And until we get back on track, I am going to insist on adhering to our founding principles. George Washington would not have stood for a national anthem. He would have drawn his sword if he'd heard the Pledge of Allegiance. And when you tell people like this, Jeff and I had a long drawn out debate on a friend's Facebook page. He's a radio announcer. I've been on his show before. And the gist of it was, look, I really like the way things are right now. I like having a strong national government. In fact, they did a show where, and Jeff and I were talking about this, we'll do another show on this very topic, but the point of it was there was a Republican questionnaire at a convention or a caucus. What should Donald Trump be doing? And the questions all range from jobs, healthcare, immigration, infrastructure, safety. And the interesting thing was not one of these fell into the category of Article 1, Section 8 left to Congress. Remember, the executive is only supposed to execute the laws that Congress puts into a bill for him to sign. We have an elected king, which was something Alexander Hamilton wanted, which was voted out. So we're seeing these symptoms of nationalism where we have consent of the governed. When we have representatives that are supposed to act on our behalf, when we have 320 plus million people and this small group of oligarchs in Washington, D.C., that just goes away. So why don't you take a few minutes and give us some examples of the results from this lack of representation in this continental landmass, this big American blob?
I like you calling it the continental landmass. That's a clever way to describe this. I mean, this is a problem that we've discussed for years. And thankfully, I will tell you this, and I suspect you probably see it in your listening audience as well. More and more people are awakening to the scam that has been pulled. And let's be honest, it's been a very successful scam that has been pulled, transitioning from something at least close to a representative republic with 3 million people back in 1788 when they ratified the Constitution. At least in some ways, it was closer to being a representative republic, a republic that actually embraced Republican principles. But pretty quickly out of the gate, as you and I both know, and many of your listeners know, they began to build. They began to build this empire. Now, do I think anybody in 1788, 89, 90 thought it would end up where it is today? No, I don't. I mean, I'm not here to, I don't know the motives of the original builders of the foundation that led to this disaster we have. So I can't speak to their motives. All I can speak to is what actually occurred. And what we do know occurred is right out of the gate, the federal government began to assume powers to itself, scary powers, like if you don't pay your taxes, we will murder you, i.e. the Whiskey Rebellion. So right out of the gate, they send a signal to Americans, there's a new sheriff in town. And if you don't comply with our edicts, whether or not they're constitutional, we will murder you. We will send troops out there and we will murder you. Well, imagine the chilling effect that had on people. Suddenly they're under a new master. Now, it's still not nearly as bad as it is today, but at least a message was being sent that there's a new sheriff in town. And sadly, as this whole thing unfolded and developed over the course of generations now, we arrive here in the 21st century where many quote unquote conservatives are more in love with the idea of nation or America than they are with truth. So you question the Pledge of Allegiance. Suddenly you hate America, which in many minds means you actually hate God, because America and God are nearly synonymous, sadly, in too many people's minds. You challenge the Pledge of Allegiance. Well, you're a hater. And so
get out of this country.
Yeah, exactly. Love it or leave it. And so sadly, we get this propagated from the major talking heads, the Limbaughs, the Levins, all these guys who constantly fill people's minds with this idea of a monolithic, as you described, blob called the nation of America, which of course is antithetical to what started in 1776. So we know in the First and Second Continental Congress, when they came together to begin to discuss this growing problem with the king and their now desire to become independent, we know that the delegates were sent from 13 distinct colonies that had their own assemblies and various types of representative government that were building in their states prior to independence. So these 13 colonies are building their identities. They're becoming Virginians and Marylanders and Massachusettsans, or whatever they call themselves back then. But they began to identify with their colonies, describing themselves having come from those colonies. And that is really the very beginning, the very impetus of this idea that we're sovereign states today. We began with sovereign mentality in the 1770s. Now, the talking heads are doing a great job of erasing that. And public education and our stupid government in Washington, D.C., the oligarchs you described, they're doing a fantastic job of erasing all that thinking from the average person out there who truly wants to do the right thing. And along comes Cerebus Radio Network and others that are out there that are untangling the mind, that are unplugging people's brains from the matrix. And it's a good thing that's happening. But it begins with truth. It begins with dealing with truth and following where the truth leads us, no matter how painful that is. And that means that if we have to disassemble Washington, D.C. because it is a corrupt, evil empire, then doggone it, you disassemble Washington, D.C. and stop being a baby.
It's become a security blanket for us.
Oh, of course.
People just think that the only source of our solutions are actually the cause of our trouble. And that is this, say it with me, bipartisan, corrupt,
morally bankrupt, illegitimate national government masquerading as a federal government located in a 10 square mile swampland we refer to as Washington, D.C.
And that is Kreslins' creed. We will all memorize that. And I tell you what, when I listen to these other shows as well, and I go on, I have access now. I go on this show out here in Sandy, Utah, South Jordan, Utah. It's called K-Talk Media. And I'm a regular on the morning show on Tuesday mornings. I don't know how much longer I'll be welcome on the afternoon show.
What happened?
Well, see, this is that whole thing, Mark, Suzanne, you were just saying about being comfortable. People are very comfortable with what we have. It's what they know. But the problem is people think they're conservatives. Well, what are they conserving? Well, if you read the 10 pillars of communism, we have implemented to one degree or another all 10 of them. And they're comfortable being Marxists.
Yeah.
And try to challenge that notion, and they're conservatives. Well, they are conserving Marxism.
Yeah.
And they're
they don't like to hear that. They don't like to hear that what we have right now is the exact opposite of what was intended. And then they will cite, I mean, I've been on the air on both shows where I'll get a caller, for instance, when I talk about the Second Amendment and that there are no such thing as Second Amendment rights. It's a restriction upon the general government to regulate firearms, period. And then somebody calls in and cites a case of Miller, which was a case where the Supreme Court said, well, the Supreme Court said that certain kind of shotguns aren't within the Second Amendment. I said, okay, so here's what you're telling me. Article 1, Section 8 never delegated the authority to the general government to regulate firearms. The Second Amendment is no more than a reiteration of that fact. So now what you're saying is the Supreme Court, a branch of the general government, is coming along interpreting the Constitution in a means that grants them more powers, and that is your justification for the general government continuing to restrict our rights illegally, unconstitutionally. Unconstitutional laws are null and void and without legal effect. People want to run to these politically connected lawyers in their government-issued black costumes. And, you know, we could talk about the firearms. That's really bad. We talked about that last week, and I just had an article come out explaining why it is important for us to be equally as well armed as the general government. If you haven't seen that picture from England, outside of that hospital where that little baby was being held hostage with about 20 police officers standing guard, so this baby will be forced to die. You tell me that we should not be equally as armed as these tyrants that decide life or death or over our children. And as you mentioned earlier, the indoctrination has been a complete success. When we start talking about secession in California, for instance, all of a sudden, among the left, secession doesn't concern racism. And then the people on, this is how it started, the host on that other show said, good riddance. I said, well, what if it's a state you like? Do they have a right to leave? What if it's a conservative state that has overall the values that you embrace? Is it okay for them to leave? Well, you know, either Lincoln settled it or he didn't. I said, might make right is not the same as a constitutional convention. And I try to point out to these people who call in and tell me, I don't know anything. The Congress can make any law it wants. They have these powers. The state surrendered them. And it's very conflicting for them to try and embrace this notion that the rights that they have don't come from the Constitution. What we have to do is enforce our sovereignty in the states. And secession is something that was embraced. It was reserved when the states ratified the Constitution. Three states reserved that right. We talked about equal footing. And what happened to these people? The very first sentence. The interesting thing is sometimes when I go back and forth to the gym, I'll put on Patriot XM, and usually because it gives me fodder for my show. And Mark Levin was lecturing a caller that Abraham Lincoln was the greatest emancipator of all time, and harkens that sentiment back to the Declaration of Independence. But interestingly, in the Declaration of Independence, it starts out when in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another and to assume among the powers of the earth separate and equal station to the laws of the land. And they're getting to say this, they have the power to impel them. They should declare the causes which impel them to separation. That when any form of government becomes destructive to those ends, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, it's the right of the people to alter or abolish it and institute another new government. This is consent of the governed. This is the heart and soul of our very foundation. Now, they knew at the time that the King George, that Parliament wasn't going to say, okay, cheerio, on your way then, be gone. You know, we get it, go away. They knew there was going to be bloodshed. They knew there was going to be war. So now, interestingly enough, this new government evolves consumes the rest of these state constitutions, which pre-existed the general constitution. And then when you try to teach, we're breaking federal law right now. Title 18, United States Code, I think it's 2385, makes it an illegal act, a federal crime, to advocate or teach the duty to violently overthrow the government. How convenient is that? A government born out of violence, not only in our American war for independence, but it assumed power of its own violently. Lincoln's party, the Republican Party of the 1860s, got its position from violence and maintains its position from the threat of compelled violence, and now says, but you can't even teach that it's our duty, that is a duty to overthrow our tyrannical government that we have imposed upon you. Don't even think about it. One of the results we have in this forced acceptance of whatever these Supreme Court justices and justices decree is the murder so far of 60 million babies and counting. What do you think about that, Mark?
See, this, I go through kind of waves like we all do when it feels like it's kind of hopeless out there, and then things happen. And so if we recognize that God's providential through all of history, there are always these moments in history where something out of the normal happens. So what's happening right now? We see California is leading on the secession movement. Well, we can capture these now as teachable moments. And so all the indoctrination, because it's sourced in lies and deception, the indoctrination that has occurred really can be quickly broken by truth. And so we have these little moments that appear right now in our lifetime. Suzanne, I can't believe we're seeing some of the things, and we're talking about some of the things that we're talking about right now.
Exciting times.
It really is. So I have this kind of hopeful feeling right now that truth is beginning to prevail, at least in some parts of this union of 50 separate sovereign states, which my objective is just to restore the union of 50 separate and sovereign states, which necessarily means the decline of Washington, D.C. It just has to go away and has to be reformed in some other state with some very limited powers. And we go back to confederation. And we're beginning to see people understanding this. Now, a couple of movements, topical movements are emerging right now that are leading this charge. So obviously in California, in certain parts of California anyways, there are large groups of people that want to propel themselves into some utopian progressive socialist form of government. They obviously do reject Trump as the president. They reject the conservative, which isn't conservative at all, Congress. And so they are beginning to make noises. We want to go it alone, and we want to try our own thing. To which I say, fine, I support you. I won't move there if you accomplish your goals and become this progressive socialist utopia you think you can create. I won't join you in that, but neither am I going to shoot you and murder you to stop you from doing it. Sadly, many of the flag-waving conservatives out there say exactly that. Oh, we're going to shoot you. We're going to murder you. And back to your point, this entire experiment began in violence in 1776. 1775 in Lexington and Concord. It began in bullets flying. And you have properly, so exquisitely analyzed this, that which began in violence now uses violence to maintain submission. So they threaten you and me with murder. We will murder you if need be if you don't pay your taxes. First, we'll just garnish your wages. Then we'll start threatening to take your property. But if you don't pay up, at some point, we may murder you. Is that a government that has legitimacy, moral legitimacy? And this is the angle we must attack at. So is it right for any conservative And if you're a conservative listening to this and you dare say we should murder Californians because they want to secede, you are an immoral, repugnant person who doesn't understand anything about our founding, yet you claim to be this great patriot of this country. And I'd love for you to connect with me on Facebook. I'm on Facebook all the time, my personal Facebook page, Mark Kreslins, and challenge my thinking. You are immoral. You have actually embraced a kind of immorality that leads to slaughter. The same thing with the evangelical community that has replaced the God of the Bible with the God of the Constitution. The Bible says in the first commandment, you shall have no other gods before me, including America, including the Constitution that you think is divinely inspired because of certain pseudo-historians running around in the evangelical community telling you that these guys were all Christians and God nearly inspired the Constitution. Knock it off. You're sinning. You're sinning against a holy God. Stop it. Repent and stop.
You know, that's
interesting. Mind straight.
That's a huge problem I see out here in Utah, because somebody high up in the LDS church at one time had said that the Constitution was handed to us by God. And when I try to say, no, that's not true, they get apoplectic. This is just a real touching point with them. And yeah, exactly. And this is where we have this crossover where the church is interpreting for them a political ideology, and they're doing it incorrectly. So I try to point out to them, look, do you think God considers himself so fallible that he included Article 5 so men wiser than he could correct his mistakes somewhere down the road? Or if you want to say this was divinely inspired, which Constitution did God hand us? The Constitution as ratified or the Constitution as interpreted falsely in 1925, thanks to the incorporation doctrine? So we have two constitutions here. The Constitution given to us by the founding generation and ratified by the states, or we have a Constitution now handed to us by a left-leaning federal judiciary. Which one? Because they're not exclusive. Well, they just won't go there. Well, no state can violate the Constitution. Nobody can violate it. Well,
it's a living, breathing document.
Yeah.
So it changes with the time. So today, homosexual marriage is fine because God has changed. He can change whenever he wants. It's his word doesn't matter. His omnipotence doesn't matter. So now LBGTQ and LMNOP, that's okay. We can do whatever we want. What's next? Pedophilia. I shared that article about that doctor saying that it was the right thing to do to murder little Alfie over there. And I asked, well, what's next? Is that going to be an affirmative defense for murderers? Because it was the right thing to do for this person. Their life was so miserable. I murdered them I did them a favor, and it's an affirmative defense. Where does this end? If this is a living, breathing document, then it certainly can't be inspired by God, because then it's subject to whatever women change comes down the pike.
Here's what I'm excited about, guys. And this is where I talk about these little teachable moments that appear that we need to seize and move on as rapidly as we possibly can. First, we get to this California secession effort. Seize it, move on with it, use it to educate people that states have the right to leave the union when they want to. The second thing is what's going on down here in Oklahoma with my good friend Dan Fisher running for governor down here. This is monumental, because we potentially in 7 weeks will have really in 7 months, we will have a governor sworn in to Oklahoma who will openly defy Washington, D.C. and begin the process of a political argument that will lead to a total reorientation of people's minds about Washington, D.C. and about representative republics and all these political philosophies we've talked about for years. We've now finally taken the theory and embodied in a candidate that has a real shot at winning this race down here. Now, the race is predicated on the declaration of arguments that came out of the Declaration of Independence. Dan is not making constitutional arguments. And I know why he's not, because they're unwinnable. they're always going to end up with a politically connected lawyer in a black dress saying what is or isn't constitutional. You go all the way back to Marbury versus Madison and that one stupid line in that decision where he said, we emphatically insist that the judicial department become that department that decides what is and isn't law. That's just his opinion. And from that point forward, they seized a new power to themselves called judicial review. Now, many scholars,
the most powerful branch.
Yes, and many scholars will say that judicial review was always inherent in the Constitution. Well, regardless if it was inherent or not, Marshall codified it in 1803. So here we've lived under judicial tyranny for 200 plus years that has led to the wholesale slaughter of 60 million babies. The largest Holocaust in human history is going on in this great nation, excuse my French. And we've got a candidate for governor down here in Oklahoma who's making arguments from the Declaration that all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that amongst these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and that to secure those rights, governments are instituted amongst men, deriving their just powers. Obviously, murder of a baby is not a just power, from the consent of the governed. So he is taking us back as a candidate to 1776 in a very articulate way. He is opening the minds of people here beyond what people can imagine, because why? He's speaking the truth of our founding. We were not founded on an oligarchy of 9 politically connected lawyers in black dresses. The lie may have been propagated that that's our founding, and it has been very successful, but at its core, it is a lie. L-I-E. It is a lie, and I'm telling you, folks, especially for the Christians in your audience, it is a lie right straight from the pits of hell. That's where it originated. And the way so every culture that we identify as evil has done a few things. It is advanced child sacrifice. So you go back to the Old Testament with Moloch. It desires to kill the most innocent among us. And then the other evil governments kill their own people. They start killing their own. Now, history records these governments as evil. History is going to record this country as evil, and rightfully so. We've legally murdered 60 million. Get your minds around that. In Oklahoma, right now, what time is it? It's 9:30. The abortion mills have fired up here in Oklahoma. By now, 1 or 2 babies in this state have been murdered. Murdered! It's got to stop, folks. We've got to stop by changing our thinking. Get off the Constitution. We have to move from legal arguments, because the Constitution inevitably leads you into a legal argument. It goes back to 1776. A legal argument for 1776 would have been, "Oh, King, please follow the unwritten English Constitution that grants us certain rights and representation." To which he said, "No, I'm not going to do that." They realized some point in 1774, 5, they figured out the legal route ain't working. So we're going to now exercise our God-given political unalienable rights against this government. We are going to say we are declaring independence from you for these reasons. And they list 27 of them. But make no mistake about it, we don't care about the English Constitution anymore. We're not even going to make those arguments anywhere. We're going to say, you're doing this to us, and we are now going to declare independence from you from that. And if you're going to get into a war with us, we're going to fight back. So that's a political argument, and we must make political arguments right now, because those are more powerful. Governments derive their just powers from what? The consent of the governed. We both know there is no United States of America without those 20 words. There's no, because otherwise it's just a complaint document. It just says, well, we don't like what you're doing. It's a factual document insofar as it communicates this idea of unalienable rights. But without those little 20 words, governments, to secure those rights, governments derive their just powers from the consent of the government. That flipped, we don't even understand how much that flipped everything on its head. No people had ever said that. In a fiefdom, do you think they went to their Lord and said, "Oh Lord, you derive your just powers from our consent"? Well, what would the Lord have done? I think I'm going to murder you all.
Their head.
You all are get on the chopping block because you're losing them today. That's what he would have said.
Drawn and quartered. They'd be lucky if they got their heads chopped off right away.
You're right.
You know, we talk about this whole symptom that we're suffering from with this nationalism. People think it's patriotic to cheer this on. For instance, one of the comments I had read with regards to California seceding, I post articles about that and say, "California, how may I be of assistance?" And one person had actually commented, I don't know if it was on mine, but one of the comments I had read was, "Well, yeah, let them secede, then we'll bomb them and then return it to the conservatives." This is exactly what Lincoln did. And when you try to slay the sacred cow of St. Lincoln, particularly when I get on these AM shows, people just say, you know, just like your show, "Sherman, you big dummy." You're just
Kreslins, you big dummy.
We talk about these, how we've been indoctrinated, and I refer to it on my show as this trifecta of evil. You say this came straight from hell. This story came straight from hell. A trifecta of evil is maintaining this false narrative. I call it the government, the education system, and the media. Interestingly and conveniently enough, the former two regulates the latter, or the former one regulates the latter two by means of grants, licensing, regulation, you name it. It's a stranglehold, and people have embraced it. It makes them very uncomfortable to hear for the first time that their hero, the great emancipator, the one who saved the Union, was really an evil man who broke every law. When I was teaching at the Patriot Camp last summer, and I haven't been asked back this year, one kid had asked, "Has anybody ever committed an act of treason?" I said, "Well, Lincoln said that the states in rebellion never left the Union. Treason's defined as waging war against the state. So by that definition, that would be Lincoln." And this woman in the back was not very happy with me, but she never came up to discuss the issue with me. But we have turned into a group of citizens, a national citizenship that reveres and worships our government and not God. In fact, I did write an article about that called Church of the National Government. And one of the things I thought of was I, on my travels, had gone to Washington, D.C., and gone to the Lincoln Memorial and inscribed in that memorial is the following: "In this temple, as in the hearts of the people for whom he saved the Union, the memory of Abraham Lincoln is enshrined forever." Well, as we know, a temple is a place of public worship, especially a larger, imposing one. And here we are worshiping not a man, not a God, but a mere man who went to war, not to free slaves, but to collect a tax. And people don't want to go there. It makes them very uncomfortable. But interestingly enough, we have obfuscated the true reason for this war and made it into something very palatable. And then you have these guys like John Bolton, whom I was absolutely disgusted to see elevated to a position of power in this administration. There's a video of him. We'll have to play it sometime, but you can look it up and find him with John Stossel saying when you take a position of secession being legal when you're siding with the Confederacy, and Lincoln went to war to stop that, killed, he said 600,000 Americans, was 850 by revised estimates, but he very emphatically then says, and it was the right thing to do. Wow. So now,
I'll tell you, Suzanne, this is why we need to be as emphatically for the truth, and that with that kind of passion, because one of the great problems, I cited two positive things that are going on right now with California and with Oklahoma, but there's also troubling parts of this. And this is what we run into here in Oklahoma, the resistance against truth. especially within the evangelical born-again Christian population, this is deeply troubling. As a former pastor myself, as an evangelical Christian, I will tell you what is happening on the ground here in Oklahoma. We run into two types of people here routinely. We run into Christian leaders down here. They may be called pastors. They may be called ministry leaders. And they are entrenched in nationalism, and they will not get off of that. Conversely, we run into the people in the pews. They hear the idea of abolishing abortion and that we have the ability to end a Holocaust. They flip immediately. They're like, why didn't anybody tell us this before? Now, we passionately describe this. We tell people that you are obligated by God himself to abolish abortion where you can. Proverbs 24:11 says this. It says, rescue those who are being led to death. Oh, hold those back who are stumbling to the slaughter. Jesus tells us in the Great Commandment in Matthew 22 to love our neighbors as ourself. When did the preborn baby not become our neighbor? We're to love them as ourselves by rescuing them from being led to death. Now, when we impassionately talk to our fellow Christians here in Oklahoma and tell them that you are bound by God, not this Constitution, not even the Declaration, you are bound by God himself to rescue those who ought not to be being led to death from being led to death. You are obligated. Now, what does that mean for us here in a representative republic, in a republic that is that in a country that was founded on some foundational governing principles I alluded to a few moments ago regarding the consent of the governed? That the sole purpose of government is just to secure the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That's it. That's all they do. Now, when we tell people down here with passion that you can align your biblical beliefs with that form of government, they flip immediately. They're like, why? Well, there's a reason why nobody's telling you. Because leaders like their power. They like their influence. They like the prestige. They like being called pastor. And they want to make a living off of this, so they take the easy road. Why would you as a pastor want to lose your stupid 501c3 status because you might say something from the pulpit that might be hinted at something politically? What's wrong with you? Is your allegiance to your job, or is it to the God you say you serve? So for the Christian in Oklahoma, you have no other option other than to support Dan Fisher for governor. You will be held accountable before the holy throne of God. You will be judged on June 26th how you vote. If you vote for if you claim you're an evangelical born-again Christian that follows the teachings of the scripture, you will be held accountable for your vote in this way. You have a guy running for governor that says, I will obey God. When I'm governor, I'm not going to create a theocracy, because a theocracy isn't necessary in a representative republic. The majority of the people in Oklahoma are born-again Christians. 1.3 million evangelicals reside in this state. They make up the majority. And their will in a representative republic that still has majoritarian concepts to it, aligned with the foundational governing principles in the Declaration of Independence, that government is only limited to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, they have the power to enforce their will, their consent to abolish abortion. They're aligning themselves with God's word and our foundational governing principles, that government secures the right to life. You're obligated in Oklahoma. And if you're in another state and you're a Christian, you're obligated in your state to do something other than talk and pray. Go ahead, Suzanne.
There are a lot of myths that go around and platitudes we hear. For instance, there's a gentleman running for governor in the state of California. So I asked him on his Facebook page, are you going to run on a platform where you propose to abolish human abortion in the state of California? And his response was, I am the only candidate that is supported by California's right to life or pro-life movement. And I just responded, that does not answer my question. And I got no response back. And then I put Dan Fisher for governor and tagged that so people can see there is an alternative. And you try to have this debate with people and you hear from them. I had a conversation with a very left-leaning individual the other day, and she said, well, I'm not pro-abortion, I'm pro-choice. And I had this conversation with another gentleman, and I said, you know what? You're entitled to your opinion. Just call it out for what it is. You are in favor of the murdering of the most defenseless members of our society, the unborn baby. You support that. Don't try and cover it up like a little kitty does with its litter box, with its poop, and say, I'm pro-choice. Choice sounds really nice. Choice would be nice, for instance, like say for our health care. We don't have that. In fact, let's tie this into, it's a very slippery slope where the government can decide, well, it's okay to kill these babies before they're born too. We are going to ensure the death of this baby after he was born, as we're seeing in England with little Alfie Evans. The parents valiantly tried to save his life. Italy tried to save his life by saying he's a citizen, bring him here, or we will care for him. The government said, no, we are not going to befuddle the image of our national health care system. This is happening over here. We have individuals other than ourselves deciding what kind of health care we're going to have. We accept it. We tolerate it. I took a picture when I was in California of this beautiful new, this beautiful mall shopping area. And there's a nail salon. And right next to that nail salon, there's a common wall with Planned Parenthood. Planned Parenthood spelled out in pretty pink little letters. You think this is a place where families can come and plan. No, this is a place where while you're getting a pedicure, babies are being cut to pieces and murdered right next to the common wall. Heck, you can even do both in one morning. You know,
so here's one of the issues, Suzanne. You're raising a great point. This is why words matter. We have to change the terminology. It's no longer enough to be pro-life, because pro is used by both camps. I'm pro-choice. I'm pro-life. So the debate becomes who's the most pro of whatever they believe. We've got to change the terms that we use. We have to move to abolition. Abolition only can be interpreted one way. You're going to take some action. You're not just going to talk about how pro-life you are or how good you feel about being very pro-life. You're not going to just talk. Abolition now means you have to actually do something. You have to take an action to abolish. Abolish is a finality. There's not a process of abolition. There is ending. It terminates something. In this case, abolition of abortion terminates a legal abortion in our state. In Oklahoma, it will be a crime. And here's what's going to happen on day one with a Governor Fisher.
Yes, let's play this out a little bit. I want people in the last part of the show. Dan Fisher is elected. What's going to happen and what this means for federalism, true federalism, not nationalism, and a representative form of government. And I'm going to say it right out here. I hope this is not the time you come on with me. I know you're super busy, but I want your headset back on, and so do our listeners. So go ahead.
Thank you very much. I enjoy, believe me, I miss being on here. So here's what's going to happen. This is going to be historic. You're going to talk to your children and your grandchildren, and their grandchildren will talk about to their grandchildren. When a candidate for governor becomes governor here in Oklahoma and restores something resembling federalism. Now, here's how it goes down. Now, I'm not going to give all the details of this because there are some things that are kind of top secret right now, but here's how it's going to go down. Day one.
Also, we need to save some time to talk about free the states, because people need to come out and support that. Go ahead.
Thank you. So day one, he is going to call an emergency special session of the legislature. The governor in Oklahoma has that power. Now think about why that's important. Babies are being murdered the day he's inaugurated. So he'll be inaugurated on a Tuesday. His hand will go down from the after having sworn his oath to office, and that day, babies are going to be murdered in Oklahoma. He's going to go back to his office. He's going to call an emergency special session of the legislature to come in. Even though we go into session in February, he'll be sworn in January. We're going to tell, get your fannies back in that seat. And I want a bill of abolition on my desk in 3 days. I want you to pass a bill criminalizing abortion in our state. And as soon as he gets that bill, a sequence of events are going to happen. Some very rapidly that are going to end up with potentially four physicians in jail in Oklahoma. In jail, in handcuffs, in orange suits. Because why? Because they committed a murder. We're going to have potentially 4 women in jail in Oklahoma. Why? Because they attempted to murder their child. They were part of a murder. See, folks, we totally blew it. I repented of this. We totally blew it when we saw abortion as a political issue to be regulated by legislators. Oh, Kreslins, we're going to stop babies being murdered after 20 weeks without ever being intellectually honest with myself and saying, what about the babies up to 20 weeks? The 98% of them that are going to have their heads torn off, that are going to have their arms removed from them, that are going to be scalded to death. Why didn't I think about those 20 babies up to 20 weeks? But I waved my flag and I said, oh, what a victory we have in Jesus with babies after 20. What was wrong with my thinking? It's because I made abortion a political issue and not a legal issue, which it is. Do we treat any other kind of murder with regulations? If I murdered Suzanne today, can I go to my congressman and say, hey, you know, I want to be able to murder people who I don't want to. I want you to prevent me from murdering people over 40, but I want to be able to murder people under 40. And therefore, if you pass that regulation, I can murder Suzanne because she's under 40. She's 39. So
and if people think that's crazy, there's an article that came out, a minister in Sweden. The healthcare system there, it's been socialized medicine for decades. And she is saying that the healthcare system is crushing down. It is crumbling down on them. The problem, she says, is the older citizens of Sweden, not the refugees. Alfie, too expensive. He wasn't going to survive anyway. So they thought. They didn't know. They're not God. They prevented him from getting any more treatment. You think this is crazy? There was a case in Canada where a gentleman, a teacher, professor, tried to bring his son in with Down syndrome to be a citizen. Nope, he's going to be a burden on the system.
Yes, is it.
Rahm Emanuel's brother came out with a paper where individuals, human beings, were considered units. And at what point the units were worthy of treatments. Babies, not so much. Not much has been invested in them. Working age, tax generating chattel, those we want to save. The elderly, not so much. They've contributed what they're going to contribute. And you know what? We don't really care about them anymore. They're not going to be in political power or revenue generating power for us. Logan's Run, in light of everything that's just happened recently, I never liked sci-fi as a kid, so I watched this movie last night. The scene starts out with 2 of the Sandmen, the guards, looking at a nursery, brand new babies that are created in a laboratory, by the way. And one of them says to the other, what does it matter? He isn't yours anymore. These babies aren't yours anymore. We don't care about them. They're just somebody's decision to make, and we will take taxpayers' dollars and fund that murder, regardless of how people feel about it. And the Christians will say, and I was told this in my Bible study class, Romans, just pay your taxes and God will sort this out eventually. I don't think God's going to view this pastor very favorably for telling us to keep supporting the murder of human babies. The other thing, and this is why what we do here is so important, and this is, gosh darn it, when I hear these other talk shows, oh yeah, Trump's going to fix immigration and he's going to bomb Syria and this is great. And then here I am out here, wait a minute. And The question is, when you ask questions, it slows you down. By golly, I want to slow this train wreck down. Go ahead, Jeff.
I just wanted to share one thing, and one reason this is so important, what you're talking about and what Dan Fisher's talking about, it is going to catch on. People are going to start realizing that this whole sham of 20 weeks, or in case of the mother's health, all this is a sham. It just keeps entitling them to commit murder. But here I have an article. Ohio Republicans go after Roe, abolish abortion in its entirety. The article starts off, the GOP bill would allow physicians and those who undergo the common medical procedure to be charged with murder. See, and this is from March 23, 2018. See, it's already starting to take hold in other places. And that's why this is so important, what we do here. Suzanne and I don't do this, and the money we pay to get on the air, this isn't done just so we can see ourselves in our nice little screen here in front of us, or hear ourselves talk on the radio. It's because it matters. It makes a difference. We have to spread this message. If we don't do this, then we are responsible for those murders, because we shirked our responsibility to do what God has told us to do, to evangelize.
Yes. There was once a time when Samuel Adams seemed like an extremist, or he was crazy. Where are these people? Where are the Sam Adams? Where are the Paul Reveres? You know, that's us. That's a really lofty standard, but I'm not afraid to stand out there, have people think I'm crazy. I may or may not get invited back to teach these patriot camps or certain radio shows. I'm fine, though, if I can plant that seed and make that impression. Something else we have to wrap the show up, but I want to come back at some point, Mark, and have you know, we're saying about what we're going to do to these people who are murdering these babies. You also have a plan to help them. We don't have to make them, as the liberals will say, strap them to the tables and force them to give birth. That's not what we're talking about. But I have come across a couple times in the past month or so, people saying that individuals' evangelical beliefs should not be a factor into their political goals. And my response to that was, well, you as an atheist, or you as a homosexual, the two people that I had these conversations with, certainly have an inspiration for what your political aspirations and agendas are. But when you use that word evangelical, I don't hear Sharia law. I don't hear anything else. This is going against Christianity. Mm-hmm. You are trying to say that me, as a Christian person, I do not have the right to interject my values politically, but somehow you do. It's okay for you to oppress me, and we've accepted that. I'll let you expound upon that, Mark.
Yeah, here's been one of the good things about the Fisher campaign. It has made being more forthright with our beliefs more masculine. We can get back on the battlefield. Dan is running a intentionally God-honoring campaign. So when you go to his website, you'll see passages of scripture all over the place. When you go to his Facebook page,
Governor, right?
That's Fisher. Right. That's right. That's right. Dan Fisher for Governor on Facebook. Fisher for Governor is his website.
And there's a donate button. Hit it.
Yes, please. And I'll tell you, I happen to know the polling going on in the state. This is a wide open race. Dan has an absolute opportunity to win this thing. Now, Dan is more libertarian minded, which most Christians are, by the way. There are always a group of evangelicals that have a theocratic bent to them. They want to govern. They want to bring the Mosaic law from the Old Testament into the New Testament and start stoning homosexualities. I grant it. There's always that group of people. That's an ongoing debate within Christianity. But the vast majority of evangelicals just want the government not to do what it's doing now, which is legalizing the murder. You want to see why our values are in such decline? As I used to talk about on my old show, the culture is down. It's not crashing. It's down. Do you want to know why? Because we legalized the murder of innocent babies. So we're going to restore justice. In the book of Matthew, chapter 23, Jesus is speaking to the leaders, the religious leaders of the day, called the Pharisees and the Sadducees. It's the famous "Woe to you who say this." He says to the Pharisees and the Sadducees, "Woe to you, leaders who neglect justice." God is a God of love, absolutely, but he's a God of justice, and do not ever lose that idea. He is going to punish sin. He is going to punish disobedience. You are going to be held account for what you do with the freedoms we've been given here. And if all we can do with our freedom here is to go to McDonald's and swill down another milkshake and while we pass by the abortion clinics, you're going to be held accountable for doing nothing. It's okay to pray and ask God to stop the Holocaust. That's wrong, because you're blame shifting God to something he didn't do. You stopped the Holocaust.
And with that, we are out of time. We are going to have you back, Mark. I want to talk about Free the State. Go to the webpage, Free the State. You have a website, Free the State?
Free the States, freethestates.org.
freethestates.org. We're going to have you back, and we'll figure that out after the show and talk about what we can do to help these women that are facing this absolutely horrific decision and how we can help them make the right one. Everybody, I want to thank my very, very special guest and friend, Mark Kreslins, for joining me today, and hoping and praying that it will be the first of many such appearances. I know people are saying we need a Mark and Suzanne show. I'm not saying, I'm just saying. So for now, this is the Wasatch Report with Suzanne Sherman, Mark Kreslins, and Jeff Johnson on the Cerberus Radio Network, where we defend freedom and liberty from the flames of tyranny. God bless you all.